Thank you very much. And let me first start off by saying it was an incredibly energizing morning, Chandra, and to just hear the tremendous momentum that exists with all of the recommendations was particularly gratifying. I'm delighted to be joined on this panel by an esteemed set of folks from the industry, and we're coming together at a real inflection point for what's happening with technology. I think if there was a theme associated with all of the different recommendations, it was the role that technology and digital transformation is actually going to make in improving society. And if you take a step back and if you think about the various waves of what has happened with technology, the emergence of the internet, the emergence of mobile devices, the move towards cloud computing, the reality is that each of these tectonic shifts in technology has actually compounded the previous impact. I think all of us on the panel would agree that artificial intelligence actually has the ability to further enhance and to further improve on all of the other building blocks that have been done thus far. And for me, the way I'd like to describe a little bit of the potential of what happens with AI is to really just think about if you could have the ability to have a personalized tutor so that education as we know it could be transformed. If you had the ability to have healthcare on a mobile device so that you could get personalized medicine to the way that you want. If you had the ability to make financial inclusion, which was again a big theme of the discussion earlier, available through the hundreds of millions of people. And if you had the ability to ensure that governments could engage with citizens, I think that is the opportunity that AI really presents. But I think in conjunction with the opportunities, there's certainly a lot of conversation about what the potential risks are associated with it. And we'll touch on issues of trust, issues of inclusion, and issues of privacy when we talk about what's happening as well with artificial intelligence. I don't know how these don't seem to move, but if I could move to the next slide. Perfect. Okay. So with that, let me actually, take the time to introduce the esteemed panelists that exist here today, and maybe to touch a little bit clearly on what each of these companies are doing at the forefront of AI. I mean, it's incredibly clear that the innovations that the Tata Group is driving across human resources, supply chain, marketing, travel and hospitality, and customer care, AI is certainly at the hub and the center of everything, and it's a pleasure to have Chandra here with us. One of the things that I wanted to do was introduce each of the panelists with something that each of you may not know. And clearly, I think, Chandra, you've been trained for this as a result of the over 17 marathons and 40 half marathons that you've done. So welcome to the panel. With Microsoft, Microsoft's clearly been at the forefront of AI when you think about their advances in cloud computing with Azure, when you think about what's happening with things that have now become vernacular for the industry, terms like Copilot, and what you've done with innovating around source code with GitHub, and clearly Bing Chat and the immense success that Bing Chat has had. Those are really also about harnessing the power of productivity, and we're thrilled to have Brad Smith with us. And Brad's claim to fame is not just that he is incredibly proficient about matters of trust, matters of privacy. But very early in his career, Brad actually insisted that when he joined a law firm, that they gave him a PC, demonstrating that he was both a great lawyer in terms of what he had in his contract, but also really understanding that the profound impact that PCs would have on civilization. So thank you for joining us, Brad. We also certainly know the transformative power of financial inclusion and what's happened as it relates to MasterCard. And when we think about speed, when we think about the number of transactions, when we think about fraud, it's clear that MasterCard and Michael Miebach have been at the forefront of it. And I think Michael trained for this as a result of having a real passion for speed, as well as a passion for racing. And so I understand from Michael that his passion, in addition to MasterCard, is all about driving motorcycles at speed to get prepared for this financial explosion that we have. So thank you for joining us. And last but certainly not least, my friend Arvind, when you think about what actually the company was that revolutionized AI, it was clear that Arvind and IBM was at the forefront of the transformative impacts of AI. What they did with Watson, the Watson supercomputer, what they're now doing with Gen AI and quantum computing, it's clear that Arvind personally and IBM as a company have been really thinking about AI. And so I'm thrilled to have him here with us, as well as share his perspective on this. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit perhaps about the role that Adobe has played on this as well. Certainly with the over 2 trillion PDFs that represent the world's information. We recently introduced our own generative AI capabilities called Firefly, and we've had over 1 billion generations. And our mission is to enable anybody who has a story to tell that story through creativity. So in a small way, we're happy and pleased to be playing our role as well as in this. So before I turn it over and have every one of the panelists talk a little bit about their ideas of AI, the opportunities, I just wanted to reiterate some of the big numbers that I think you've already heard from Amitabh and others. The one that's staggering for me is that 46% of the worldwide real-time digital payments are happening in this country. That is an absolute mind-boggling number. And the fact that we have 1 billion people with Aadhaar cards and 850 million smartphone and internet users, I think just represents a massive opportunity for this country to be at the forefront of AI. So some staggering numbers. But with that, let me invite Chandra maybe to just start off and talk about AI opportunities and challenges.
Thank you, Shantanu. Absolutely exciting to be part of this panel. The first thing is we are starting from a base that all of us in the panel are strong believers in digital AI and technology and what it can do for business and society. See, the digital transformation has been a theme around the world for at least a decade. And now it's better to talk about AI transition, because digital transition is becoming a night job. The day job has to be AI transition. I want to set the context from India's point of view. Whatever I'm going to say is applicable for all nations, developed and developing, and certainly for the global south. If you look at the impact that digital transformation has made in India, it is just truly, truly remarkable. Because in India, we fundamentally have two problems, and which is true for many of the global south countries. We have lack of access. Hundreds of millions of people, an estimated 300 million people, lack access to services like healthcare, education, and some time ago for banking. Not anymore. And on the other hand, we have a lot of people looking for jobs. We have 10 million to 12 million people coming into the workforce every year. 100 million people coming to the workforce this decade. So we've got to solve both problems. These cannot be solved by going around and creating hard infrastructures. First is you need a lot of money. More importantly, you need a lot of time. We don't have the time to do it. So the only way to solve this problem is by adopting technology, and adopting technology at a pace and scale that has never been done before. What have we done in the last 10 years? India has put in a digital infrastructure which is so unique that we could deliver public services at a remarkable scale and with ease. We loosely call it the India stack. What is this India stack? First, we have a unique identifier, digital identifier for everybody, all citizens. Second, we have a payment system which has completely transformed the way we operate, we live. Not a single day goes where we don't look for a couple of OTPs. None of us carry cash. Even a street vendor, when I go for the morning runs, we want to have a coconut water from a street vendor. He doesn't have time to accept money. He says, sir, phone pay karenge, Google pay karenge. So this is the normal language in the country. The third element is we have been able to create a secure infrastructure where the consent is given digitally on the fly for the transaction. I think this digital public infrastructure is what enables us to do very, very big things at scale. The second point I want to make is the example of COVID, the way we could vaccinate people, the way we could build an app and track all over the country citizens with COVID and getting vaccination, etc., could not have been done without this infrastructure. So the opportunity to make impact on AI is of a different scale now with generative AI, because the world is already moving from predictive AI to generative AI. The second point I want to make is about then what is the worry? Everybody is worried. Why? There are two worries. One, people worry about privacy. The second, people worry about will it take jobs away. Actually, in a country like us, it will create jobs because it will empower people with a little skill or no skill. Will empower them with information and skill so that they can perform a higher level of job. A nurse will be able to take away the workload of a doctor. And that's the way we are going to scale up. And I will not go into that more because we will not have time. The second point is on the privacy. I do believe that India has made a big breakthrough in this whole privacy space. India has taken a techno-legal approach. On the one hand, we have got the regulation for data privacy and data protection. On the other hand, we have created DAPA, which is Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture. Both working together, we are able to very safely secure with consent any transaction and sharing of data at aggregate level with complete security, protecting privacy. We can talk about that at length, but those are the comments I want to make. So the future is very, very strong, and we've got to figure out a way of embracing AI in such a way that we can innovate faster, at the same time protect privacy.
Thanks, Chandra. Brad?
I think this is a year that is historically important in the development of technology. And if you look at the history of our industry that all of us represent, you can look back at certain years. 2007 was really the inflection point for the mobile era. That's when the iPhone was launched. You can look back at certain years in the 1990s. It's when the internet exploded. It's when graphical user interfaces became truly popular. This is really the inflection point for AI. It's been important. All of us have been part of it, but it's a different year because of generative AI. And as we look to the future, I think that there are two things just worth thinking about. First, whenever you have this kind of inflection point, people naturally look at who is creating it, who's at the forefront of developing it, what companies are leading, what countries are leading. But it's equally important to look at who is deploying it. Where is technology being diffused? And I think especially at a national level, that is going to become extraordinarily important. I think we'll talk more about it. And then there's one other aspect as well, and I think it's a natural topic in 2023. Wherever I go, people say, let's not make the same mistake we made with social media. Of course, it helps if you can then talk about, well, what is the mistake we're talking about? And I think it's fair to say that everybody, not just the companies that were involved in, say, the biggest social media sites, perhaps became a little too euphoric about all of the good things that social media would bring to the world, and there have been many, without thinking about the risks as well. Just 10 years ago, people were talking about what social media was bringing to the Arab Spring. It was the future of democracy. And yet 3 years later in the United States, in the 2016 presidential election, it had become a very different side of the future of democracy. And so I think we need to be clear-eyed. We need to be excited about the opportunities, but thoughtful, perhaps even concerned about the downside. And we need to construct guardrails from the outset, both as an industry and as companies, and as government and as countries.
Thanks, Brad, and I think we'll come back to some of those questions later. Michael, maybe I'll ask you to say a few words.
Thank you, Shantanu. So AI is clearly going through the hype cycle. It's captivating everybody's imagination. So there is a lot of opportunity. I was intrigued by Chandra's comments, what AI could do to further accelerate the digital transformation of India. Everything that we heard from the various B20 task force, if you think what AI could do to put those in place even more effectively. So the opportunities are tremendous. My last visit in India, I was meeting the Confederation of All Indian Traders and many of these businesses. There's 70 million out here. If you just want to put this into your mind, what generative AI could do, what AI could do here in India is 70 million businesses, the backbone of this industry. Think about all the mundane tasks that a small business owner goes through every day that keeps her or him away from running their business. It's a pretty simple idea of having your digital CFO as a small business, whatever it is, to actually focus on what you're trying to do. So we can be very excited. But to Brad's point, as a company that deals in trust, that deals in safety and security, our focus in generative AI, has always been on making payment transactions safe and secure. Now, when you think about safety and security, you wonder how safe and secure is some of the deployments that we're seeing in AI, and I think this is where we need to balance the excitement about what this technology could do for us with the risks that are out there, as Brad just put it. So I think for that, we have a conversation to be had here on the stage. Where's the regulator on this? Where are frameworks on this? What is the role between public and private sector? Which brings us right back how important something like B20 is, Chandra, your leadership, and brokering that dialogue so that naturally regulation will be behind, but it shouldn't slow us down because we need this technology and we need it quick. So what practical frameworks can we put together to leave Delhi with some ideas on how to make most use of AI out there? And I think that's the way forward for us.
Thanks, Michael. As I said earlier, I think the company that was at the forefront of this was IBM. One perhaps less known fact about Arvind was that when he was growing up in India, he had certain animals as pets, including a tiger that he called Cheetah at home. And so I think we have a tiger by the tail here, Arvind. Maybe your thoughts on AI?
Thank you. Thank you, Shant. Look, a number of my colleagues here spoke about the exponential nature of technologies. Let's be clear. Let's put a number on it. AI is expected to produce 4.4 trillion annually by 2030. That's not just my estimate. I think one of them is by McKinsey, another one is by PwC. I think EY did their own estimate. So 4.4 trillion. In the context of the numbers we heard this morning, Amitabh talked about 4.5 trillion, I think. Somebody else, if you go to green transition, that I think is 7 trillion. So 4.5 trillion is significant on an annual basis of what it can provide. Now, we have to build upon what there is. So if you listen to both what Shantanu said and what Chandra said, you need a digital infrastructure in place. Once you have it, what is it that AI can do? And for a moment, speaking as a non-technologist, it is going to take on certain low-level cognitive tasks and be able to amplify them and do them. So when you can do that, you make everyone more productive. As you make people more productive, in effect, you have more workers. If you have more workers, then you're actually generating more capita GDP in each nation. So as we go back to the very beginning of B20 about inclusion, then that is a way to make the GDP grow faster across all of these countries. And our goal should all be, how do we make secure and accountable AI that can go benefit the productivity of enterprises and governments, to talk about some of the use cases that everyone here spoke on.
Maybe I'll start with you then, Arvind, as well. I mean, certainly this entire forum is about B20 in conjunction with the G20. And as it relates to maybe the competitiveness of countries and demographics, maybe you can touch a little bit about, what's the role of changing demographics? How does a country sort of focus on the adoption of AI? And which countries, I will put you on the spot, will lead this revolution?
So, look, I love my friend Amitabh, but I'll actually slightly disagree with him. I think the growth is going to happen everywhere, not just in the global south. Because actually, if you go to global free trade, you're going to get a benefit. But the demographic point, developing countries have all now got decreasing working age populations. That's not a prediction, it's just fact when you go read the statistics. Japan, China, Italy, most of Western Europe, the United States, all of them have decreasing working age population. You then add on the number of people over the age of 60 is increasing because of longer lives. So that means the ratio of working to non-working is decreasing dramatically. So how do you augment the need for labor is only one answer. So then you get to what is the role the Global South plays. And let's separate the invention of a technology from the deployment of a technology. The deployment of a technology, I think Brad made that point on deployment, is going to happen from the Global South, as we have already seen with the incredible services industry that has woken up in India. That is where I believe the initial focus should be in the South, not just to provide it for their own countries, but to provide it for the globe at large, because these workers are missing everywhere else. And so the play into the demographic need of the world. More than half the world has decreasing working age people. Jobs are really hard to fill across those places. Fill them from here. It's a technology provided on a digital infrastructure, which means it can appear where needed. And by the way, you do not need extremely deep skills for the deployment. The deployment can be done with the skills that are present with a little bit of training.
Thanks, Arvind. When you think about AI, actually, and if you have a stack, most people would say what AI is the computer's ability to, if you give it a set of inputs, to give you an answer. And computers are really great at pattern matching. What has exploded is the amount of data that's now there. So maybe for the businesses in the audience, Michael, with all this insight that's coming up, how do businesses think about how do they take advantage of AI to get insights, and how do you, make sense of all the data that people are collecting?
Right. Shantanu, before we go there, I just can't help but be reminded, thinking about what Arvind just said. If we recall the conversation around vaccines, where did vaccines first go? Where they were produced and where they're thought of. And I think that is what we should avoid when it comes to AI. It has to be everywhere where it's needed from the outset. So just a thought, I think there's a learning there. On how do businesses prepare, I want to take you into our boardroom. The question you just asked me is what my directors ask me. So I think everybody's worried about that we might overlook something, we might be too slow. I had a view that I see in our boardroom, and I see from many of my colleagues across our industry in payments and beyond, is the immediate set of use cases here is improve efficiency and effectiveness. So tools around better speed to work, better customer service. What is today's business model that can be tuned with this technology? So I think that's near term pretty clear. Coding, we're all in technology somehow. The effectiveness of coding, 20-30% is at least in there. To the point of demographics, even Gen AI will affect the workforce as well. So something to consider. But you know, is that all that exciting? It could be very exciting for the analysts. So when we have this conversation with the investor base, they ask about that and see how is this going to affect your margin and so forth. What I'm personally more excited about where it's going to go from there on. I talked about this use case earlier on potentially helping small business. But think in the context of what a company like us does. We power the digital economy. A lot of that is retail and commerce, which is the core of global consumption. And think about what we do. Last time you booked a trip. So you booked a trip and you spend a weekend trying to figure out where to go and what is the best insight, local knowledge and so forth. And you go into your mileage account and you book your plans, your transfers, and it takes you 2 days and your family is still not happy with what you pulled together. This could be done with a digital shopping assistant and travel booking. That is what Jen and I can do to many of the industries that we deal with. But what's the time frame of that? Is that going to happen at the same time frame that some of this efficiency and effectiveness use cases? Nope. I think we're thinking this is 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. What's going to happen in 7 to 10 years? Who knows? Whatever I would say now will be anyway wrong. So I think effectiveness first and use cases that tune, complex experiences and just draw on the data that's out there in a much quicker way with consumer permission and consent. And I think that's the last part here. Everything just I said, in the end, it comes down to data privacy and control, transparency, and so forth.
Thanks, Michael. I think, Brad, the title is appropriately starts with opportunities. And the G20 clearly is this broad spectrum of countries. So maybe, we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we weren't believers in the benefits. So maybe a little bit about what benefits will this bring to citizens of the G20 countries?
It's a great question, and of course it is why we do what we do, all of us. That's why we're so excited to work on technology. And I think there's a couple of different ways to think about this. One thing is, what are the parts of the economy or everyday life that AI will transform, that it will improve? Almost anything that involves data. Obviously, AI is just an indispensable tool. You can take something like pancreatic cancer. It is difficult for doctors to detect. AI is very good at detecting patterns within data. It's already helping doctors detect it earlier. You think about it, this example of a tutor. I was in Korea. The Korean Minister of Education is focused on creating not just digital textbooks, but digital textbooks with AI tutors. You take something like math, how it can help a student. I think it can help a parent who's trying to help a student remember all the math we've long since forgotten to help our kids learn math better. But I think in the context of the G20, you hit the nail on the head. There's enormous diversity. The demographic diversity is extraordinary. And to think about the fact that India will represent 1 out of every 6 people in the world, but 1 out of every 4 who is between the ages of 20 and 64, in other words, working age, it will be the people of India and Africa and other countries of the global south that will need to add to the productivity even of the OECD members in the global north. But I think the other thing just worth reflecting on is this. In some ways, generative AI is even more powerful in a country that speaks many languages, because it is such a powerful tool to help people communicate, to access information, to move it from one language to another. It's an extraordinary tool even for people who are not yet literate, where we haven't yet attained, say, almost 100% literacy. Because give people a phone and the ability to talk into it, they can ask questions, they can get answers, they can access public services. And finally, think about the skills gap. Today, for every 14 data scientists in Europe, there's only 1 in Africa. And most of the data that a data scientist in Africa would want to access is most likely to be in English. This is a tool that can help close that kind of gap as well. So the opportunities, I think, in fact, are very, very real.
That's great, Brad. There's been a lot of discourse, certainly, about regulations here, Chandra, and India recently enacted the Data Privacy and Data Protection Act. So Maybe you can touch a little bit about how governments can either get ahead or what they should do to enable this.
I think I just want to connect a few dots before I talk about the privacy. See, first, I think if you have to truly realize the power of AI, you need the right infrastructure, which essentially means whether it is cloud, data centers, the access to digital devices for everyone in the country, all of that is going to be fundamental. Once that infrastructure is there, what we will do is enable the empowerment of businesses and society at large to be able to make that impact that we are talking about. Now, the way it will play out in different markets and different segments of the society will be different. We talk about a country like India, we say that hundreds of millions of people have to have access. We have proved it with the Jan Dhan Yojana that every citizen can have a bank account. The moment that becomes available, what we are forgetting to notice is hundreds of millions of people, additional 250 to 300 million people are coming into the market. They have access to information. They have access to goods and services. In their own way, they start consuming. It just multiplies the whole GDP to a different level. And then their per capita income goes up, and we will see the benefit for a very, very long time. On the other hand, we talk about aging economies. The aging economies are also going to face longevity because the medical science is advancing. And all these people have to be taken care. And they don't have enough human resources to provide the kind of service that needed to be provided to support these people once they get aged. Again, AI will come in handy and play a very, very important role because vast majority of the things that need to be taken care can be done by AI. So the benefits are going to be different to different segments and in different markets. But everywhere it's going to create jobs, it's going to empower people to do higher levels of jobs. In markets where there are no people, it's going to substitute for human beings and provide the service that is expected. So it's so important to allow this innovation, and in order to allow this innovation, we need proper regulation and have the ability to build private applications on top of the public infrastructure. That is what has happened in India. India, the legal framework has come up with this Data Privacy and Data Protection Act, which provides the legal requirement. The DAPA is the technology architecture that provides data empowerment and protection architecture. What it does is it creates the necessary public infrastructure architecture on which you can build private applications. And it has got digital consent completely embedded. So any sharing can be done at the aggregate level with the proper consent. So it is a fantastic breakthrough, I feel, because it is very different from the traditional approach of over-engineering the laws and regulatory framework, which is totally punitive. So you will come up with laws where there is a violation, the legal recourse will be a very strong set of damages. But in a country like India, you cannot put such large damages because there is no way that people will pay. So the better way is to integrate a technology architecture with the legal framework, and that's what India has done. It is something to be studied and championed outside India.
I think collectively the folks in this room probably employ millions of people, and skilling is a big issue that everybody talks about. Maybe I'll start with you, Arvind. I mean, what impact is AI having on sort of the workforce, and how are you applying AI within IBM to change how your employees work?
Thanks. Look, this is something that we are extremely enthused about. Michael used the term initially on efficiency and later on other topics. So let me take some examples. And this is a way to scale a business so you can actually provide it to more people. One, on things like human resources. The higher level cognitive tasks like advising people on what kind of team, on developing people, those are very much human for now and for the foreseeable future. But there's a bunch of activities under it, I'll call them more mundane, more that could be automated but were hard to do so. Whether it's about promoting people, whether it's about assessing people, those can begin to be done by AI. In our case, we are doing about 90% of those with AI. A couple of people here spoke about code, 30%, 50%. We find that coding can be improved by about 60% productivity using AI assistants. Whether this is on how do you deploy IT, whether this is how you deploy new applications, maintain old applications, modernize applications. So this is sort of across the board. By the way, that 60 will turn out to be about 30 in total productivity because all of the coordination, communication, requirement gathering still has to happen. And those are also actions that I believe AI will help, but it'll be down the road. When you kind of put that all together, so first to answer Shantanu's questions explicitly inside IBM, we think about 20% of the total activity, which is around these, I'll call them lower order cognitive works. About 30% of that can be easily made more productive with AI. By the way, that frees up those people to do more value-adding work. It's not that there aren't jobs, because if you have more productivity, you can actually access way more clients because you can provide things at a lower cost point. So on the reskilling point, the vast majority of this does not need people deeply skilled in computer science. The actual invention of the foundation models, the large language models, building together the computer infrastructure, that does need people with those incredible skills. And we are happy to have them, but we don't need everyone else. The examples I talked about, the HR work was done by our HR team. They are not computer science experts, but they are domain experts who could bring their domain expertise to simple tools to go ahead and deploy it. So we find that there is a reskilling going on. We just finished a 2-week challenge inside the company where for us 160,000 people played around, in this case on our own tools on these technologies, and they got pretty proficient after about 2 or 3 days. So the amount of skilling it takes is for people who are curious, and you can come from a domain expertise side, and then for the few, you come from a physics or math background or computer science, of course, in order to progress the technology. So that's sort of the two sides, and I would highly urge everyone, don't be afraid of it. Jump on, and within a week, you'll find yourself being able to get proficient about deploying it.
Thanks, Arvind. I have the unenviable task that I was told about making sure that because this panel is between us and lunch, that we bring this back on schedule, which we will. We are the AI panel, after all. Regulation. Let's touch a little on regulation. Brad and Michael, maybe I'll have what frameworks, what should we be doing, maybe the potential risks. Let's start with Michael and then go to Brad.
All right, on regulation, I touched on it earlier. So if we wait for the regulator to deploy Gen AI, then we're going to have, I think, a bit of a problem. That is traditionally the case. The private sector needs to lead. I think it's also fair, though, to recognize that some of the risks with emerging technologies are not new. So the risks associated with AI are not terribly new. So some of the existing regulations, I think, can be adopted and should be adopted. We just talked about data privacy in the context of India. That thinking that Chandra just talked us through will apply in the context of AI just as much. But then there will be areas where there are clear gaps. So how do we find a path that we can continue to innovate and do this in a responsible way? Because only responsible AI is the AI that we should use. So, what we advocate for is you go in a principled way. This is how data privacy found its way to regulation. A number of companies around the world said, why don't we just put out very simple principles on what we're going to do? So MasterCard was one of them. We very simply said, if you're the consumer, you own your data, you control your data, you benefit from your data, and it's the industry's job to keep it safe. Can we do the same thing with AI as an industry, kind of self-regulation, and then with that lead into regulatory frameworks? Absolutely we can. And I think some of the principles that I think we should be looking for, if you think about the risks associated with AI, people don't know in certain instances if AI will be used. Is what you're looking at AI-generated content, yes or no? So transparency would be a very good principle in the context of AI. What are other good principles? Privacy and security, obviously. How about accountability? The accountability that every company that uses this would say, we are using responsible AI only, so you take accountability for making sure that happens. I think that's also absolutely true. And I think the last thing that is inherent in AI and an important principle is integrity. And here is, in AI, there's easily, you can build in biases, and if biases are there, your outcome is going to be directed in a way that is not helpful for inclusive growth. So integrity of using non-biased AI will be the fourth principle. Accountability, transparency, privacy and security, and accountability. And I think with that very simple approach, that'd be a good guide to regulators around the world.
Great. Brad?
Well, let me try to build briefly on what Michael suggested, because I think we do have to have real clarity around the goals of regulation, and the principles, Michael, that you just articulated, I think capture that very well. And I would just amplify one aspect. I think there is a real focus around the world. People want to be confident that this new technology will remain under human control. They've seen too many science fiction movies that have turned out the other way. And as we're creating what feels like part of science fiction, we need both companies and regulators to focus on that. I do think we then need to create a regulatory blueprint as governments and the private sector around the world. I think that means that some of these principles will get applied at, say, the applications layer, some at the model layer, some at the cloud or data center layer. I think that that blueprint will then need to be implemented in part by ensuring that those who are using, say, AI in their business, in some cases, need to know who their customers are and how they're using it, just like banks need to know who they're lending money to. It means that there's a real focus on knowing what cloud it's being deployed in, and there's a huge focus on knowing the content that's being created, and especially if it's being created by AI, that people have information about it as well. And then the last point I would say is this regulatory blueprint is going to require action at the private sector level, including to create standards, at the national level, and ultimately at the global level. And we're going to have to figure out how these connect with each other.
Well put, both Brad and Michael. I think that sort of addresses the how we regulate it. Let's end, and maybe I'll go and ask everybody the same question. What's the one thing you're most excited about as it relates to the implication of AI for this audience in terms of how they should think about it? Arvind, I'll start with you.
I think
Mike.
for this audience, I would tell you, how do you go get your 2 to 3 to 4% more productivity, which can then turn into free cash, which you can then turn to grow your companies or governments faster? When I say governments, I mean the economies of the nations. That's what I'm most excited about. We haven't had anything like this since semiconductors got invented.
I would say the thing I personally found most exciting is the ability to use, I'll say, one of our own products, something like Bing Chat. Ultimately, I think success in life is not by having more answers, but by asking more questions. And when you can ask a question and get an answer faster, you find that you then ask the next question. That's how you really advance curiosity.
I think for me, the biggest is the impact it can make on society by solving the problems which are very, very hard to solve.
Michael?
I think that's it. We're facing tremendous issues across the globe, from climate change to many others that we have talked about. I think that's the unlock that we need. Word this a different way, tremendous opportunity coming out of Gen AI is an unlock for a path to prosperity for literally everyone.
And for me, growing up in this country, when you thought about what provided opportunity for everybody, It used to be reading, writing, and arithmetic. I believe that digital literacy today is the great equalizer, it's the great enabler, and AI is at the forefront of that. And so embrace it. I think they are, issues that we will all have to, in a transparent, ethical, with integrity way, deal with it. But I think the opportunities are tremendous. And for every person who has the ability and access to AI right now, to be more creative, to be more productive, to be more efficient, and to create a better society, I think the opportunities are amazing. So please join me in thanking these panelists for the engaging discussion.
Thank you very much.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.